player profiles. We are continuing the series. You guys have been loving these segments. I've been loving presenting them to you guys. And we start off today's player profiles with a quarterback who, when he's healthy, certainly is in the QB 1 to 3 range, and someone who you can truly entrust with your starting QB position in terms of fantasy. And that player is, of course, Mr. Joe Burrow. Now, say what you like about Joe Burrow in terms of his health, but when I look at him, I truly see a quarterback built on consistency. There are a few caveats outside of his health that I would like to discuss in this segment as to why maybe he's not as reliable as some other high-end quarterbacks, but still, when he's healthy, he's a stalwart QB who I believe you can entrust with that starting QB position. Let's go over some of his fantasy stats as to why I believe that. Over his career, he's gotten 985.8 fantasy points. His best season was in 2021 when he went to the Super Bowl, and he garnered an astounding 350.7 fantasy points. The tale of last season, however, truly shows the ups and downs of Joe Burrow's, the frustrations and excitements that he brings to the QB position, where we saw in the first 4 games him get off to an unusually rocky start for someone of his caliber. 57.6% completion rate only. He only averaged 182 yards per game and half a touchdown over that first 4 games. But then the next 5, before he ultimately ended his season with a sprained wrist injury, 74.1% completion percentage, 296 yards per game, and a total of 2.4 touchdowns averaged over that span. And in that span, he was 7th amongst fantasy QBs in fantasy points per game, and 4 out of the 5 weeks in which he had those astounding averages, he placed among the top 8 at terms of the position. So, looking at Joe Burrow, you can see the success. You can see why I'm so high on who he is as a player and prospect. And looking at his projections, the fantasy odds say he's going to have another astounding season. Over 4,200 yards, 29 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 162 rushing yards as well for 2 TDs, for a total of 301 points. And it's kind of interesting to think that if only he weren't injured, that would be the only caveat for him, because he has been a model of success whenever he's seen on the field. And I think it's attributed to his style of play, to the leadership he brought immediately to the Cincinnati Bengals. And I just think that him truly becoming one of the better young QBs in the league proves to me that the high-end quarterback market is just so volatile because of Joe Burrow himself. And so, I would like to sit here and say that you should consider taking him as the first overall QB gone in an 8-round draft. But I can't just go off that. I can't just go off the vibe that Joe Burrow brings, because he certainly puts up fantasy points. We saw in 2021, with a picture of health, he got the Bengals all the way to the Super Bowl, just based on his testament and will to play the game of football at a high level. But there are other caveats outside of his health, and it doesn't necessarily lie in what we saw from him in the first 4 games of last season. I think that was just an outlier moment in his career. I think the caveat lies, fascinatingly enough, in his style of play. Because Joe Burrow, we know that he was a very exciting prospect coming out of college. 2019 LSU was one of the most prolific offenses in college football history, and Joe Burrow was a huge part of that, with the reason why he won the Heisman. But there was another reason as to why, up to that point, Joe Burrow wasn't necessarily considered a hot commodity in NFL markets. And that's because he didn't necessarily have a style of play up until he was with LSU and Ed Orgeron, where you just went, wow. That one season sample truly showed why Joe Burrow had such a high upside, but the years before that showed why he had such a down upside. In transitioning to the NFL, the Bengals have taken away what made Joe Burrow so special at LSU. They've grown more interested in developing an offense that protects the football. We don't see Joe Burrow truly airing out. He has the wide receiver group to do it as well. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. They are a very special group. They're one of the top wide receiver rooms in the league. And Joe Burrow was lucky to have them. But I think that the caveat is the hindrance of what Joe Burrow can do best, because he does have a strong arm. That's the one question that I think a lot of people really, when dissecting him coming out of college, had a question about. Is his arm as strong as it looks? And I truly believe it is. I just don't think that people were able to acknowledge that because of the fact that he had a very stacked wide receiver room in college. And so now, as he transitions to the NFL, I think that perhaps the style of play also contributes to why he has such a lengthy injury history as well. In terms of getting the ball out quickly, I truly believe it's an art. And Joe Burrow is still learning that art in many regards, because I don't necessarily think he's as comfortable, especially with a receiver room like the one he has, just being a guy who gets it to his weapons and trusts them. I truly think that Joe Burrow might be in that period of his career where he might want more control and say in the offense. I think he's earned that as well. And so I'm really intrigued to see if Joe Burrow can leave more of a stamp on this offense, because up to this point, it's all about safety and security. And I just don't think that another reason why he has a lengthy injury history, they had the offensive line to sustain that level of play, because early on in his career, the Bengals' offensive line was a turnstile. Now it's kind of getting to the levels that they want it to be. But right now, if you're Joe Burrow and you have the offensive line right now you feel can take you to the next level, I say that you should go into training camp saying, hey, look, I understand that the style of play that we play gets us a lot of points. We're a very exciting offense, even with me just being more of a manager of what the skill positions I have at my disposal. But I truly believe that we're not necessarily using my full talents to the best of my abilities. And so I want to now be someone who can be more exciting, add more verticality to this Bengals offense, and really take us into the stratosphere of teams that want to contend for a Super Bowl. Because Joe Burrow did get to the Super Bowl basically playing the style of football that I don't believe suits him that well. And they could have won it. They were a fourth down away from potentially getting into field goal range to win that Super Bowl. That's how close Joe Burrow was. And that just goes to show that his versatility has truly helped him and made him shine. But right now, I want to see more initiative from Joe Burrow himself to really change the complexion of this offense. Because right now, it works, but it can work so much better if Joe Burrow just has the freedom. I think that right now, you have to throw all caution to the wind. Joe Burrow's injury history definitely is very worrying for someone of his age. And it definitely could come up later in his career as he continues to progress in his NFL career and begin to understand how to take better care of himself. But right now, I think in an AFC that's looking for the next big thing to potentially challenge the monopoly at the top of the Chiefs, Joe Burrow needs to say, I'm the guy who is not going to just be your player who sits back and watches my skill core. I'm the guy who's going to ultimately make my skill core better around me. I think that Joe Burrow, a fantastic fantasy option, but he can be the QB1 that everyone knows he can be if he just, plays freely. Just doesn't care about what people say and just lets himself play the game of football the way he played in college, because I really want Joe Burrow to lead a more vertical offense to prove to me that he's the guy in Cincinnati and in the AFC to challenge Patrick Mahomes, to challenge whichever team might challenge the Chiefs, to ultimately break through and win a Super Bowl. Right now, I see him as more of someone who gets fantasy points due to his wide receivers. I want that narrative to change, and I think it can. He just has to trust himself and trust the offense around him. But that should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. But coming next, we have another quarterback player profile of a guy who is kind of entering a downward slope in his career, but still has the traits I believe can take him to at least the middle range of fantasy quarterbacks. You don't want to miss this segment on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We'll be right back.